2596, this is dispatch. We have a possible 1091. Repeat, possible burglary in progress at Shooter Supply Gun Store. Silent alarm was activated 3 minutes ago. Please proceed with extreme caution. Unit 2596, this is dispatch.
Maybe the door's open. Are you ready? Yeah. Got a hallway. All right, you got eyes on?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead and lead the way. Down. Put them down. All right, put them down on the ground. There you go. Nice and easy. All right, turn around. Put your hands in the air. Keep them where I can see them. All right, walk backwards to my voice. Keep your hands up in the air. Keep them up. Back to me. All right, keep them up. All right, stop. Down on your knees. Keep your hands up where I can see them and lay down on your chest. Palms up to where I can see them. All right, stay there. Larry, you got him?
I got him. In this week's episode of Then and Now, we're going to take a look at the evolution in firearms used to arm the patrol officer in the United States. Take a look at the progression of handguns and long guns for law enforcement in three specific periods: the 1920s to the 60s, the 60s to the 90s, and the 90s to the present day. Violence during Prohibition and the Depression of the 1930s led to an increased use of submachine guns and shotguns by police officers. But in the relatively more peaceful period following World War II, these weapons were rarely used, and the .38 Special revolver was deemed to be appropriate for most officers. Increasing urban violence in the 1960s led to a call for more powerful police weapons like the Magnum revolver and higher-powered long guns. Then, in the 1990s, drug and gang-related violence led to an environment where semi-automatic pistols, submachine guns, and assault rifles became standard issue to patrol officers. Up until the 1960s, if law enforcement personnel needed a more authoritative weapon than their service revolver, they were generally issued a pump-action shotgun like the Winchester 97 or later the Remington Model 870. In some other cases, officers could be issued a lever-action rifle, and in rare occasions, they could be issued a Thompson submachine gun. In general, police shoulder weapons were valued primarily for their commanding presence, and in some instances, they were used to take down violent criminals such as Bonnie and Clyde at very close ranges. Police agencies did not have specially trained tactical units to deal with high-threat situations, which meant the responsibility fell on the shoulders of the patrol officer. Pump-action shotguns were simple to use and extremely effective at close ranges, inside 35 yards or so. They also had the advantage of being quite intimidating. But their major drawback was the lack of precision accuracy. Lever-action rifles had a more extended effective range, out to roughly 100 yards or so. However, they did not have the intimidation factor of a shotgun, and very few officers were properly trained to use them. In contrast, the Tommy gun had real intimidation value and was very effective at close range. However, it lacked long-range accuracy and was also rather expensive. Once the violence of the Prohibition and Depression era had passed, crime in the U.S. became more of a kinder and gentler variety. Crime rarely affected the average person, and it was often restricted to specific neighborhoods and sections of cities struggling with poverty.
Versatile, rugged, functional.
Star.
Even by the standards of the frontier, the last 24 hours had been overly volatile, punctuated with an all-night card game, drinking binges, death threats, and several pistol whippings. At 3 p.m. on October 26, 1881, the battle lines had been set. 8 men lined up across from one another at extremely close range. More than 24 shots rang out, leaving 3 men dead and another 3 more wounded. The confrontation would take less than a minute, yet it would embed itself into the psyche of Americans as one of the most famous gunfights of the Wild West. The gunfight at the OK Corral.
Virgil Earp, the city marshal, had witnessed much of the trouble caused by Ike Clanton and Tom McClure since they had arrived in Tombstone the day before, including death threats hurled by Ike at the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday. With the Clanton and McClure brothers gathering in an empty lot near the entrance to the OK Corral, Virgil Earp decided to act before the brothers reached the corral and were legally entitled to handle firearms. As Virgil Earp, along with his 2 brothers, Wyatt and Morgan, and their friend Doc Holliday, walked down Fremont Street towards the Clanton and McClure brothers, bystanders sensed their simmering feud was about to explode. If I would have been alongside the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday on that October afternoon, the factors I would consider when choosing a weapon would be, number 1, point shooting. Since this is going to be a face-to-face standoff, I would want a weapon that I can simply point and shoot, instead of one that I have to take the time to aim carefully. Number 2, rate of fire. For a gunfight in this period, I want a weapon that can be fired rapidly, for it's unlikely that the fight is going to last very long. And lastly, close range effectiveness. Since I'm unlikely to be more than 10 yards away from my opponent, I want a weapon that's lethal at close range. For this week's episode of Choose Your Weapon, let's assume you were there at the OK Corral. What weapon would you choose? Your choices are the Colt Single Action Army revolver, the most popular revolver on the frontier, or a Winchester 1873 carbine, often called the gun that won the West. And finally, as we often do on Choose Your Weapon, we're going to take a look at a weapon that was developed just a few years past the actual event to see what kind of impact it might have had. In this case, the Winchester pump-action shotgun was developed in 1897, 16 years after the gunfight at the OK Corral. If you were at the OK Corral with Doc Holliday and the Earp brothers, the Colt Single Action Army would have been an interesting choice. It's lightweight, easy to control, and its .45 caliber packed a pretty good punch. It's fast shooting and very effective at close ranges, like those encountered at the OK Corral.
Terrific. So beautiful.
The close range effectiveness and the easy firing characteristics of the Colt would have made it a good choice in the hand of one of the Earp brothers. However, if I was in that gunfight, I would be concerned about the capacity of this weapon. Although the cylinder holds 6, it was only commonly carried with 5 due to accidental discharges.
and the weapon is also very slow to reload. Entering a gunfight against armed men in the streets of Tombstone, I would have preferred a weapon with more capacity and was also easy and quick to reload on the move.
Even though the 1873 Winchester fired the same round as was commonly found in revolvers of the day, its longer barrel provided it an extended range as well as more knockdown power. It was also typically more accurate. It would have been an excellent choice for any of the participants at the OK Corral.
The 1873 Winchester was certainly more effective than revolvers of that era. However, it had to be aimed more precisely than a shotgun, which slowed down its rate of fire and made it less than ideal for the rapid-fire conditions of this particular gunfight. The 1897 pump-action shotgun would have been absolutely devastating at the eye-to-eye distances of the OK Corral gunfight. This Winchester is a short-barreled shotgun, which can be fired and reloaded very quickly, far faster than the Winchester rifle. At such close ranges, I would have preferred a weapon like this in my hands than either a revolver or a rifle which fires single projectiles, rather than the 9 pellets of buckshot that come out of this scatter gun every time I pull the trigger. If the Earp brothers would have been armed with pump-action shotguns, the gunfight at the OK Corral would have even been shorter than 30 seconds. In the 4 decades from the 1920s to the 1960s, the overwhelming majority of U.S. law enforcement officers were armed with fixed-sighted double-action revolvers chambered in .38 Special. Common examples of revolvers from this period include the Colt Official Police and the Smith & Wesson Model 10. Double-action revolvers offer police officers a number of advantages. For example, they're rugged, simple to operate, and they offer an inherent level of safety. The long double-action trigger stroke reduces the chances of accidental discharge. And to make a revolver safe, all you have to do is simply take your finger out of the trigger guard.
However, revolvers also had several disadvantages.
Impact is brought to you by TAPCO.
In the 1960s, there was a sharp increase in urban violence, led by a new type of criminal that often worked in groups or gangs. They were more willing than in the past to resist law enforcement efforts and resort to extreme violence.
With the sharp increase in urban violence in the 1960s, police officers started to demand more powerful service weapons.
While Magnum revolvers had been available since the 1930s, their high price tag prevented them from being used in large numbers. Responding to rising demand, several handgun manufacturers developed revolvers specifically for police service in .357 Magnum, such as the Smith & Wesson Model 66, the Model 686, and the Colt Lawman .357.
The .357 Magnum cartridge offered police officers a much more powerful cartridge than the .38 Special. In addition, the new revolvers were constructed of stainless steel as opposed to carbon steel, which provided greater corrosion resistance. They also featured adjustable sights and heavier recoil dampening barrels.
Although Magnum revolvers were a dramatic step up for law enforcement officers, they did have a number of disadvantages. For instance, they suffer from a heavier recoil, which makes them much more difficult to shoot accurately. They're also larger and heavier revolvers, which makes them more difficult to carry all day, especially when carrying concealed. And lastly, like a .38 Special, they only hold 6 rounds, which is really not many in a gunfight.
During this period, law enforcement training was improved with an eye towards teaching combat marksmanship and street survival skills. Things such as teaching the two-handed grip, the use of cover, and the use of speed loaders. In response to the dramatic increase in civil unrest and violence in the city, the Los Angeles Police Department created the first Special Weapons and Tactics, or SWAT team, in 1967. For SWAT teams, it was clear their primary missions of engaging heavily armed criminals, serving high-risk warrants, hostage rescue, and armed encounters were beyond the capabilities of the standard pump-action shotgun or the Tommy gun. Instead, SWAT teams were equipped with special weapons such as semi-automatic handguns, combat shotguns and sniper rifles. Submachine guns like the MP5 came along a bit later.
The SWAT concept was quickly copied in cities all across the country. However, it became clear that standard patrol officers also needed access to shoulder weapons with enhanced firepower and accuracy so they could respond to situations as they developed before the arrival of a SWAT team.
With the introduction of high-capacity semi-automatic pistols and rifles, the six-shot revolver in law enforcement essentially just became obsolete. Urban riots in the late 60s and early 70s illustrated to law enforcement that they were ill-prepared to deal with widespread lawlessness and violence. Street cops wanted and in many cases needed superior weaponry, and by the 1990s, law enforcement agencies had switched from revolvers to the semi-automatic pistol.
Following the lead of the U.S. Army, which had adopted the Beretta 9mm handgun as their standard service pistol, most police agencies initially favored a 9mm handgun.
Today, popular police pistols feature lightweight frames, high-capacity magazines, high-tech finishes, and some form of double-action trigger mechanism.
Relative to the revolver, the main advantages of the semi-automatic service pistol for patrol officers are: number one, high-capacity magazines. This allows individual patrol officers to engage in sustained firefights without having to reload as often. Number two, double-action trigger mechanisms, which allow for simple operation and enhanced safety. Like a double-action revolver, they require a longer, more conscious trigger pull in order to fire. There's no need to manipulate safeties, and there's less chance of an accidental discharge. Semi-automatic pistols are lightweight, and their compact size makes them easy to conceal. In addition, police officers can use them as their off-duty gun. In spite of using high-performance ammunition, the recoil of a semi-automatic pistol is generally a lot less than a revolver.
The only significant drawback of the semi-automatic handgun is with its high-capacity magazine, it can encourage the use of spray and pray tactics, in which officers fire a large volume of unaimed rounds as opposed to carefully placing their shots. However, this weakness can be managed with proper training. Events like the North Hollywood shootout in 1997, where Los Angeles patrol officers were heavily outgunned by two well-armed bank robbers, demonstrated the fact that in addition to semi-automatic pistols, patrol officers needed access to more powerful shoulder-fired weapons.
However, in the United States, citizens are not prepared to accept street cops armed with submachine guns or other suitable shoulder weaponry on a daily basis. Increasing numbers of police patrol cars are now equipped both with a shotgun and usually a semi-automatic rifle.
For tactical police units, compact assault rifles like the M4 carbine or F2000 have started to replace submachine guns. These weapons provide submachine gun-like firepower at close range, except in a better caliber, 5.56 versus 9mm. They also have the ability to engage targets at a longer range accurately if needed.
The F2000 is not nearly as menacing in appearance as a standard submachine gun or an assault rifle. Unlike most bullpup assault rifles, the F2000 is designed to be used just as easy on the left shoulder or the right shoulder. What allows this to happen is the fact the ejection port is forward on the weapon rather than back here by your cheek piece. The empty casing is directed in a tube above the barrel and then funneled out the front.
The M4 is a prime example of a weapon system being adopted by law enforcement that was originally designed for the military. First available to SWAT units, now patrol officers are getting their hands on them. One of the advantages of having an M4 in the police arsenal is that officers with prior military experience are already very familiar with this platform. In addition, there are various optics that can be mounted to the platform that require less training.
This segment of Tactical Impact is brought to you by FNH USA.
You know, this week at looking at arming the patrol officer through the decades, I can't help but think that if the bad guys hadn't upped the ante, our cops would still have 38 special revolvers.
Probably. You know, the officers started getting outgunned with their 38 specials, and really two things happened. The first was the advent of the .357 or the Magnum revolver. That was a game changer. And the second thing was that law enforcement finally started to really take seriously a lot of their training.
And later on, law enforcement agencies really started to lean on the military, looking for weapons and tactics to help out the patrol officer.
Absolutely. And nowadays, virtually every police officer carries a semi-automatic pistol with great ammunition. They have subguns available, patrol rifles in a lot of the cars. With those kind of tools, they really are well equipped to deal with the criminal element. It's always a little bit of walking a fine line between arming the patrol officer with the tools he needs to get the job done and not overly alarming the public. You also don't want to start an escalating arms race with the criminal enterprises.